Hello and good evening to one and all. Welcome to another stream on Ray for Truth Ministries. A subject I've been doing a bit in the past, and I thought, why not go back to this topic as it's turning out to be a very, very sort of powerful topic. It's certainly hitting the scenes. There's a lot being said in the public domain around. What I'm calling is the case for God, the argument, is there a God? Tonight we're going to specifically look into that argument with regards to the morality, the argument of the moral argument for God. So before I kick that off, a few little bits of admin. Those who do want to subscribe, please do. It does help the ministry. If you can hit the like button as well, that also helps. And by all means, share the stream. I want to let people know about my ministry. I really do highly recommend watching the videos that I do publish, because it covers so many subjects, and it's very, very, one, educational. It's two, very factual. I do my best to be honest and accurate with my explanations and references, so that you are not in any way misled. And of course, you can still have a very much uninformed view of things. You don't have to necessarily believe what I'm explaining or what I'm trying to put as a case, because I will do it in a way that leaves you to consider these things. And even so, I'm also totally happy to um, um, allow people to join and get involved in the discussion. I'm trying to actually add for some reason it's not working. I don't know why. Let's see if we can get this link going. The chat, what happened to the chat? You're chatting, waiting for me. Okay. Just trying to add. The chat's not seem to be working at the moment. This is not good. Not good. We need to get this chat working. For some reason, it's not working. My apologies. There we go. Not sure what that was about. There's always little gremlins going on with this PC, whatever. So anyway, last week we had some real issues. Couldn't get anything to work, and the microphone wasn't working. One thing after. I have a different mic now because it was actually my studio and a USB hub that was causing issues. Just a word of warning, if you are using a USB hub or any kind of interface which has multiple devices linked to it, in order that you may not have the necessary peripherals on your laptop to accommodate all your different devices that you're linking, then I would recommend that you get one that is powered. So what I mean by that is, like I have now, is I have a USB port that has 10 USB ports to go into my one single port on my PC, but now it's powered, as in it has its own separate power source that I've connected to the mains. So I've plugged that in, and that is now running. And with that extra power, it ensures it covers all the various different devices in a more robust way. And it seems to have made all the difference, because these small little interfaces that are not powered, they're using the existing power from your PC. It does cause some challenges over time, as I've discovered. So anyway, that's all now working fine. So now everything hopefully is back to normal, until I get myself a new in a studio mixer interface that allows me to connect professional mics and use the mixer facilities to tweak the sound better and everything else. We're going to have to bear with it. Hopefully the audio is okay with this mic. It's only a basic mic, but it's okay. It's got a decent rating. It's seems to do the job. I used it in fact yesterday, and that seemed to work okay after testing the results. So hopefully you can hear me fine. We do have the link in the in the chat. So those that do want to join, you can now join. This is what I think is one of the most common questions that people ask is there a God? Why do I need to believe it? And there's a big reason why I've actually decided to do it tonight, because in the coming, if it's not next week, in one of the very forthcoming weeks, I'm going to actually attack a rather hard task of looking through and reviewing critically a debate that Cliff Henkel, his surname I can never pronounce it, Knekel, had with Matt Dillahunty. Now, Matt Dillahunty is quite a well-known atheist apologist, if I can call him that. He's certainly a very strong debater on atheism, and he has been one of the more, shall I say, challenging atheists for a number of different reasons. One is he tends to articulate things in a very kind of sophisticated way, as if it's like a gotcha moment. I've got this way of explaining it. You can't provide a response to that. And if you don't provide a adequate response, it's kind of saying, well, there you go, I've got you on that point, which is why we can't move forward, which is a way of trying to say he's dismantling or rebuking or debunking the theist argument. But what I'm going to show, that's clearly not the case. It's far more to it. And Cliff did, I would say, a pretty decent job. Wasn't easy because Matt has got a style about him. He's very emotional. He does use a lot of choice words. He gets quite aggressive at times. He gets frustrated quite a lot. This is very common of Matt. And sometimes I don't blame him, because he does have cases where certain individuals that he's debating don't answer the questions that he's raising. But there are some twists to a lot of this, because, as I say, the way that he asks is quite sophisticated. So I think it is about knowing how to answer. And it's much more difficult for Cliff when he's having to answer on the spot. The advantage I got is I've spent probably over 12 hours already on this debate to determining a very good understanding what Cliff is trying to say, what is Matt trying to say, and what do I think is a very good way of, one, kind of explaining it, and two, what is kind of the review, the critical review that we need to kind of share, which each of the major points that have been raised. And I think that's going to be an incredibly interesting, if not entertaining, session. We might get one or two people join as well. That would be good, because it's going to be very powerful. So much so that I'm even going to consider writing a book on the subject, just on this particular debate, being a critical review of this debate, because I think it's a very powerful debate, because it really gets to the crux of whether Christianity is true, while at the same time, when you're testing it against an atheist, it does bring up the whole argument of whether there is a God or not. So combining those two kind of subjects, it's a very interesting debate. I certainly enjoyed watching it, even though it got a little heated at times. And I'm not blaming anybody necessarily. I think, to be honest, Matt had, I actually do quite like Matt, and I do quite like some of his debating skills. He's very, very slick when it comes to his debating skills. But as slick as you are, the difficulty is sometimes uncovering the layers of what really is he trying to say here. What does it really mean when he says X, Y, Z? And I think that's where I'm going to unveil some of that to share with you, because when you do listen to some of these points he raised, it is very hard to provide a adequate answer. So I'm going to try and do that. Cliff did make a very good attempt at it, but as I say, he didn't have the advantage I've got, and that is I've spent loads of hours doing all my research and study and rereading the script. I've read the whole of the script of the, I don't know, 1 hour, 40 minutes, whatever it was, debate. So that's coming up anyway. Enough said about that. That's coming up very soon. So I think this could be a good, like maybe a series on this whole argument of whether there is a God. Today we're going to look at the moral argument of whether there is a God. But before we start, one of the big arguments which has developed over the years is where did everything begin? Now, an atheist position back then was that there was just nothing, and then from nothing or whatever became something, and then something over billions and billions of years. You just keep chucking billions of years at it. Eventually, you'll get the universe as we know it. Now, the thing with all that is if you like, the basis or foundation of atheism. I'm sure an atheist would agree, and I have no problem, and certainly Matt Dillahunty has no problem agreeing with this, because that's his strong advocate, is that it's based on science. If we're going to prove anything in terms of universe, in terms of the beginning, best method or tool to use is science. The reason being, for him anyway, and I think he's got a valid point to some degree, is science at least is a methodology that is very robust and has clear ways of testing, proving, demonstrating some sort of evidence of whatever science is investigating. So there is a methodology that is a very good methodology to explain things. Well, actually, it's the science that has changed the argument, funny enough, of atheism, because this whole thing about nothing creating something is just nonsense, of course. And the universe was always existed. Again, that is proven to be clearly untrue. It still would cause a few issues. But the main thing is that science has come across over the years, especially in the last couple of centuries or so, whatever, is the fact that the science is almost without question, without any very little to dispute, that the universe had a beginning. So why is this important? So if the universe had a beginning, what do we know about the universe? So there's really only two options that really come out of this. Is either the universe itself somehow created itself, or in other words, what is it that caused the start? Now, the thing with everything that had a beginning, the science also follows that by saying everything had a cause. Everything that has a beginning has a cause. The reason why we know that, again, I'm going to use science because all of science says everything in science has proven, with no exception, that everything we know that has a beginning has a cause. So that leaves us with two options, as I said. One is that a universe, now that we've got evidence that clearly shows by science had a beginning, was it and therefore had a cause? What was the cause that started the universe? Now, just to get common sense in here, that cause cannot be a beginning, of course, because as we said, everything in the beginning has a cause. So whatever was that kick-started the universe must have not had a beginning, and therefore it was an uncaused cause. So then we have to say, okay, even from a science point of view, that would be an agreement that because everything had a beginning, the universe had a beginning, whatever started the universe must have not had a beginning. It must have been uncaused, because every beginning has a cause. I hope you're following me so far. So now we have to define what that uncaused cause was. So what information do we know? Well, the first thing is it cannot be time, because time had a beginning. It can't be space, because space had a beginning, and it can't be matter, because matter had a beginning, and therefore all of those would need a cause. What we would also know, based on what we know of the universe, that this uncaused cause must be powerful because it had to make the universe, had to be powerful enough to make the universe. It had to be intelligent because what we see of the universe is it's incredibly sophisticated, fine-tuned, etc. No one's disputing that. No atheist would dispute how sophisticated the universe is. Therefore, this uncaused cause needs to be intelligent. And the third one, which is not used so often, but is a very good point, is that this uncaused cause needs to be personal because it made a choice. The choice being that from nothing, the choice was made to make the universe. It just doesn't just happen from nothing. A choice would have been made from this uncaused cause. So that leaves us again, a powerful, intelligent, personal, uncaused cause is what started the universe. And so far, an atheist who has done his homework by looking at what science, the latest science has provided, would be in agreement. So what this then leaves us with is, do we believe that a powerful, intelligent, personal, uncaused cause is just matter or nothing or whatever? Or is it what we call God? Because is God what we're calling powerful? And just at this stage, let's just say this God is just the body that exists, and obviously must have always existed because of what I've just explained. Because anything that had a beginning has to have a cause, and therefore you would have the same problem with God. So whatever that beginning was could not have had a beginning because it doesn't have a cause. It must always have existed. It must be outside of time, space, and matter for that reason, because all those things had a beginning and therefore had a cause. We are calling it God, or this thing we're calling God, because it has to be powerful. It has to be outside of time, space, matter. It must be without a beginning. It must be also intelligent, and it must be personal, because what we can see here is a choice. And that's a bit I'm now going to touch. This bit about personal. What we see, that what we are calling God must be personal. It's making a choice to create, if you like, the universe as we know it. And we know without us as humans tampering with it afterwards and making a bit of a mess of it, to be honest. In some places we've done some fantastic work, I would agree. Great inventions, a lot of great stuff that we have done in the world. We've also done some very evil stuff, some very bad things. There's been many wars. There are many people that are dying with illnesses, or one illness after another. There's a lot of people in poverty. There's a lot of people in fear. There's a lot of people that are constantly being persecuted. And so there's a lot of bad things going on in the world. But that we can see is clearly the result of choices made by us humans. We have free will. We clearly have free will. We can make choices, what we do tomorrow and so on. That's self-evident. Don't really need to explain that one. But whatever the beginning was, that what we call in God, whatever this thing was that, as we say, could not had a beginning, therefore it's got to be uncaused, has to be intelligent, powerful, and personal. And that personal bit is that we therefore are going to look at. And how we're going to look at that is, and why I'm alluding to what we're doing as humans, is this whole thing about the moral argument. So what is the moral argument with regards to what this uncaused cause that we're calling God is? And the evidence is going to be down to whether we say, is it what we call God as this argument, or something else? Or even Matt said that somehow, which I find a little bit farcical really, is he's trying to justify that the moral argument of morality is just something that's, we just have it, it's somehow evolved. But again, that's really going back to my question, that's fine if it was on an individual level, and that would be what we call subjective morality, where we just have a way that we behave, and that is a kind of form of morality. Because as we come into this world, we have the ability to make choices, and then in those choices, there's got to be good and bad choices, and that could be a form of morality from that perspective. And we have, because we have intelligence, in fact, very sophisticated intelligence when you compare it to any other creature in the world. That's why what we have done as humans is far superior to anything else. You won't see any animal or non-human create what we've created, and developed, in terms of advancements, computers, technology, travel, and so on and so on, chemistry, microbiology, in providing cures to diseases, etc. Huge advances that only humans are capable of doing. So that ability allows us to make choices, and those choices, as I say, can unfortunately be not just good, but can also be bad. And we have clearly seen the evidence of that. No one's questioning that man has got both good and bad in them, because we see the result of both in the world. What we're talking about, however, is objective morality. And one will be asking, well, what's the difference? Objective morality is basically saying there is one set of morals that just exist, that cannot be questioned, that are clearly true and exist in all of us. And I would argue, I think if you've got to be, even as an atheist, you've got to be very, very careful here to consider, do we really agree on this? Do we really have a set of what I would say is objective morality? Well, there's two ways of looking at this. The one is just to look at it directly head on and say, okay, do we agree that we have moral values that are objective, that we are, in other words, all in agreement? It's one set of absolute moral rules. And I would say yes. And let's see if we can all agree on this. Even you atheists that may be watching. Would you agree that love is a good thing? Would you agree respect is a good thing? Kindness, patience, self-control, a good thing? Appreciation for others, equality, if you like, treating everyone the same, not treating people differently, and trying to create a hierarchy of superiority between people, which means you're downgrading others just because you don't like the way they live or whatever it may be? Or do we have a self-respect of every one of us, at least as humans, as being equal as humans? I mean, we may be different in the way we act, and some people deserve certain things in life because they've earned it. And of course, there are people that have acted badly in the world, obviously deserve, if you like, the sentence or the punishment to that crime. So there are levels within humanity, but as humans, we would agree we are all at least equal as human beings. And those are what we call good qualities, and that's what we call the objective morality. And on the other side of the coin, of course, is bad things. Of course, rape would be one, killing. I'm not talking about self-defense or whatever. I'm just saying unwillingly just killing people just for selfish reasons. Of course, selfishness is another bad quality. Hate, anger, and so on. So as much as we will have what we call subjective morality, objective morality is clearly what we have now defined as qualities that we would all agree on if we're being totally honest and reasonable amongst ourselves. And that's where we're saying that's objective morality, and that morality must be something that must have been part of the uncaused cause. It must have been there at the beginning. It's that uncaused cause that must have created that moral framework. Because if that moral framework came directly from us humans, somehow, again, the issue would be, well, that would be what we call subjective. The reason being is, as much as we have this innate ability in us, we have the difficulty of being able to truly, how shall I say, outwardly demonstrate this moral code. It seems to be there is a level of what we call subjective morality, where we have differences of opinion. we seem to have, even though we have this knowledge of what these objective absolute moral codes are, we have a lot of difficulty in expressing them in our lives because we do have free will that allows us to make good and bad choices. One of the more difficult cases for that is, which is where the morality comes really under question, is when somebody, and we've seen history like of this, where somebody that could do something that is clearly evil, but doing it for what they personally feel is for the better. I'll give you a simple example. Let's use Hitler in World War II, where he decided to try, or at least try, to pretty much wipe out the Jewish faith because he saw them in his own view as inferior, because he didn't like the way they lived, and didn't like the way they behaved and their customs or whatever it may be. And he felt that the European race, the German race, whatever his ideas were in his view superior. Of course, that's a very subjective view, and it's a very dangerous view, of course, because if everybody went around with that view, we would be in a far worse place than we are now. So Hitler's view was, I'll just wipe it out, because then what I'm doing is the better, so-called better race will be the one that will be dominant, and the offsprings will come from that dominant race. And it's kind of what he would call a way of purification, if you like, of the human race. We know now clearly that's a part of nonsense, because science has already proved through medical research that there is no particular human from a particular country or race or whatever you want to call them is any superior than anybody else. We know this because when we look at if everybody was given the same opportunities in terms of education, in terms of wealth, in terms of being able to have resources so they could be fed and live in a comfortable place to live, and given the right education, geniuses will come from all walks of life. There is no exception. And we see that in universities now that people are having this more freedom to um, be more involved and have all the resources they need. Countries have definitely improved in terms of their internal infrastructures, so that wherever country you go, I know there's some countries, for example, in Africa, that are struggling in many ways. There's a lot of poverty in those countries, but they still do have universities. They still have education. They still have people that have jobs and money to live a reasonably good life. And for those, at least, the evidence shows that there are some brilliant minds that came from Africa, Nobel Prize winners, top scientists, you name it. So it's only about opportunity, not subsection of race or whatever you want to call it. It's all humans really are just potentially as equal as everybody else. It just depends on what they do when they go through life and what the opportunities are given to them. So enough said about that. And then, so subjectivity then is, okay, if we rely on just purely our moral codes as humans, as I'm explaining, like the case of Hitler, then we go down the road of things are basically chaos, even though we do, it's innate in us that we know these qualities. Because if we had a test and we all wrote down what do we think is good and bad and top level, you'll see an incredibly consistent agreement on what those qualities are. I don't think there'd be any much exception to that. Of course, there will be the one or two, and there will be reasons for that. One could be they're medically not sound, for one. Two is that they've done so many wicked things in their life over time. It's kind of over time, kind of had an impression on them to make them think this warped way. So, you're going to have exceptions, but of course, when you have 99.9% of everybody in the world pretty much agreeing what's good and what's bad, that is really the clue. And that's what we're going to look at. So this objective morality then is, again, part of an establishment of where do these morals come from? Again, like we did with the case of the cause, beginning at the beginning must have a cause. Morals that are objectively, that just seems to exist in all of us, suggest that there must be a moral giver. So why can't that moral giver be the one that is the uncaused cause that is all powerful, intelligent, and all personal, to be the one from the personal level, be the one that offers those morals. That makes a lot of sense to me. I'm not even saying at this stage that this is God necessarily, because, like I said, we are calling it God from a Christian perspective or theist position. But an atheist still might at least agree, based even on science, that there is this so-called uncaused cause that must be intelligent, powerful, and personal. Therefore, it would make logical sense, quite logically, and probably more likely than not, and this is the important point, it's more likely not to be the lawgiver or the moral giver, if you like. We could say these morals are like a law in a way, that structure the human race. Because the human race is very unique. It has this amazing ability to understand at a very high level, a very sophisticated level even, of good and bad, far more than anything else on the planet. We do see some, if you like, degree of this with other creatures, certainly certain animals, maybe dogs, apes, chimpanzees. There are many other animals that show some definite qualities of these same virtues. When you see, like, especially when it comes to childhood, when you look at any animal that bears children, there is incredible love between the care of the parents, especially the mother of the offspring, to take care of that. Now, the only difference, of course, is with animals, it's not as anywhere near as sophisticated in the level that an animal can go in expressing those good qualities, whereas humans are without doubt the pinnacle of these qualities. We can express these qualities on a much more sophisticated level. Some people may dispute that. Good luck to try and explain that one or prove that one. I think without a doubt we have the greatest ability and potential of utilizing those qualities and expressing them more than any other creature, and we do demonstrate that. But because of free will, the flip side is we also can be the most destructive or against those codes if we get the wrong kind of thoughts in our head or get influenced by some very devious, selfish individuals. And we see that, say, like with Hitler, was a very selfish individual, and that did affect his moral judgment. And we saw the result of that, and nobody would agree that was ever a good thing that he tried to do and the way he conducted himself during the war. And he was one of many, of course, that were part of that group at the time. So now that we've kind of really understood this whole thing about the objective morality, again, why is this the claim that for the case of God? So the reason being is, first of all, as we said at the outset, that the main objective point of view is the uncaused cause is powerful, intelligent, has to be outside of time, must always existed, and it must have been personal because it had to make choices, the choice to create the universe. So in addition to that, we would see and agree that, as a very good case anyway, that uncaused cause that we're calling God, of course, is that it would have been personal as well to make the choice from a moral perspective. Because if God did not provide this moral framework, we would be really, and on top of that, of course, it wouldn't also include the level of intelligence that we have as humans. If that wasn't also how we were created, with this level of intelligence, then we would be really no different to any other creature. So there's something extremely unique about humans. And this is why we believe that the argument for God, at least from a moral point of view, is a very strong one. Because back thousands of years, well before science had really had answers to these questions, it certainly didn't understand the universe back then. Only more lately did it start to work out that the universe had a beginning, and and if it had a beginning, and then we also know everything that has a beginning, science is agreeing that has a cause, which then begs the question, where did the beginning start? Must have been an uncaused cause, and therefore we're down to that now. That was not known or established thousands of years ago. So if we have something that explains this so many thousands of years ago as a, shall we say, the most plausible explanation, then that's got to be something, I would say, that's worth considering. And what we will do in further weeks is we're going to take this one step further to see why we were saying the case for God, because it's not just from a moral point of view, it's from many, many aspects that provide the case for God. And that's why I'm doing this big review with the debate between Cliff and Matt, because they do cover this subject quite extensively. So I think it's a great, great thing to look at from both angles. So just to be fair, it sounds a bit like I'm just putting my case for God purely from a theist perspective, and maybe one people will say a theist bias. I'm going to try and help you with that, because I'm going to try my best anyway to put forward the atheist position. As I said, the atheist position at least has changed, because in the past it had all sorts of funny ideas about, and fair enough, I'm not going to knock them for it, that, I remember Richard Dawkins even saying, "Oh, something came from nothing." And of course, the whole audience laughed their head off, because we have no science whatsoever to prove that something came from nothing. So what do? They just throw billions of years at something. But if something's impossible, it doesn't matter how many years you have put to it. It's a nonsense. It's a nonsense argument. We have now discovered since that the universe does have a beginning. And that's really great, because whoever created the universe created it in such a way it provided that evidence. Because the way that science has now investigated the universe, it clearly shows that it's expanding. And not that I'm in any way technical enough to explain all this, but basically through that expansion, you kind of reverse engineer that it was therefore less before then and before then, which then points to the fact it must have had a beginning. Because the further back you go, the less expanded it was, and therefore it'd be at some point where it would be at its minimal, if you like, level, where it could not have been any smaller, even if that's one cell, for example. And it's like we will, I think I did cover on other streams, but we'll cover it again. Or is that one cell, as we now know, isn't just some little blob or whatever? It's an incredibly sophisticated, unit, a single cell unit that contains like what we would be the equivalent of a very sophisticated computer code. I mean, the amount of code, of language, of intelligence within that one single cell, again, points to something very, very sophisticated. So whatever that beginning was not something that was just simply a blob. That's not what science is showing. It's showing it was very sophisticated. That's the evidence we've got. So the theist position, the atheist position is then saying, okay, whatever this uncaused cause being, therefore has to be outside time, space, and matter, was something that just evolved from the universe, and that we just don't know how that happens. That's still something that science is yet to answer. There could be a multi-universe effect, but I don't think that really answers the argument, because if it was, then the other universe, well, where did that come from? You're still back to the same drawing board, that what we know now is that everything that we see, that we know in the universe, had a beginning. That uncaused cause is because it couldn't have had a beginning. Otherwise, that would need a cause. What is that? Still uncaused cause. And I think a lot of atheists just do not want to admit, even though we're following these logical steps, to admit that there is a God. And that's where it gets a little bit interesting, and we'll see that in weeks to come. So what do they say? So there's something called naturalism, also known as eugenics, that basically things just evolve and get better. And I actually agree there is some truth into this, to be honest. I think when we do look, there is some level of development in species, maybe, or there's a development or improvement in the world and the universe, or maybe there is some form of internal evolution going on. But here's where we start to get problems with this, is if it was just simply matter that just was small and just evolved and it got more sophisticated, even though we haven't quite explained the uncaused cause, let's just say for argument that uncaused cause was matter, or was the universe, or something, or a fractional fragment of the universe. The problem with it is it's matter has never been scientifically proven at any stage to have something that's personal, that has the ability to make choices, has the ability to say, okay, I'm going to create or evolve a certain way, and that way is I'm going to produce creatures that are going to have this ability to have free will, the ability to choose, the ability to have, with their intelligence, to be sophisticated in a way that comes with this moral code, as a set of morals as well. What I think you would say more logically, and any good scientist would agree, if you just have matter and you just let it, maybe somehow it, I don't know how it ever begins. That's the issue they've got. But if that issue was an uncaused cause that's not God, it's just going to be matter that will just evolve, and that would be more chaotic, wouldn't it? It would not be in order. It certainly wouldn't be that intelligent, because matter isn't intelligent, and we would expect, therefore, to see a much more of an unorganized mess, if you like. We should see chaos all over the place. We should see a universe doing all sorts of crazy things. Even if you do throw billions of years at it, we've got no evidence, certainly not from science, that just by leaving a bit of matter over billions of years, whichever way you want to look at it, is going to be creating an incredibly sophisticated order of the universe that we know. And that's the point, is the level of how incredibly powerful that cause needed to be, how incredibly intelligent that needed to be. And this, again, not forget, especially for today's topic, it had to be personal, because it has to make choices to create a certain way. It's a bit like let's say a computer. If you had a small, I don't know, bit of metal that you took from the, like I got my laptop here. It's quite a good laptop, to be honest. It's quite a well put together laptop. It does lots of things, although last week it was giving me some trouble. But apart from that, it's been a very good laptop. And I take a little, I don't know, a little piece from it, a little bit of metal from that laptop, and just put it wherever and leave it for billions and billions of years. Is it going to make a computer? Even if, because it's got like traits of the computer because it came from a computer, in somehow a computer came out of it, it's more likely to be a computer that's all over the shop. It ain't going to be one that's very sophisticated. There are going to be bits missing, and the story will go on and on and on. Science does not show and demonstrate that matter can produce the level of sophistication necessary, the power that's necessary, and the right personal choices necessary for it to end up being a very sophisticated, well-made computer. All we see, everything that is incredibly sophisticated as we know it, putting the universe aside, has a maker, and that cause has to be the right type, i.e. intelligent. That's the evidence, that's the science. So why can't atheists say that this uncaused cause is this intelligent whatever? The difficulty, of course, is when we start calling it intelligent and personal and powerful, it all starts pointing to what we call God. Why that's so important is because this was written, as I said, thousands and thousands of years ago. So this whole thing about morality is a very, very interesting segment or part of this, because morality is incredibly precise in what is good and what is bad. If it was just matter floating around through just crazy, random, evolved processes, then morality would be all over the place. Some people will be thinking love is a bad thing and being completely convinced of it, and it would be chaos, believe it, even worse than what we see today. Because despite all what we do see today, you really don't see anyone disagree with what these objective moral standards are. So I think a person, unless they're being very dishonest, would all agree there is some kind of objective morals. And even Matt had to kind of resign to that fact. Well, I just need a sip of my coffee. Made by my beautiful wife. Thank you so much, Stella. She does make a very good coffee, with the help of a very good machine, of course. So, where was I going with this? So, yeah, that moral code just is really, again, at least Matt was even agreeing. Yeah, we kind of agree that there is what we say is positive morals and negative morals, and I think we'd all pretty much universally agree what they are at a top level. So again, this all points to, as I said, a moral giver. Now, I'm not saying I can prove there's a moral giver, and this is the point that I need to argue on this debate with Matt and Cliff, is just because I can't prove there's a moral giver doesn't mean there isn't one. Now, you could say, well, the burden's on you. You're coming up with a claim that there's a moral giver. But let's look at it in a more sensible way. I'm not saying I'll put in the claim. Let's just say I'm not. Let's just say all I'm doing really is just looking at what is the most likely option. We've got to put on the table. It's a bit like, say, we had a crime. I'm just thinking when my wife likes watching crime scenes, so we were watching this guy, another horrendous specimen of human being who's has killed a lot of people. He's going to court. There's a verdict next week. It's in America. It's quite well known now. It's been circulating in the news. But what we would do is, if we wanted to prove whether or not he was the person who committed the crime, we would need to put the evidence. We would need to put, okay, what do we know? And we'd have to put it all on the table. All the options would go on the table. So even other people would be put on the table to say these are potential suspects. You would have other suspects. He would be the main one, of course, and you'd have to go through your due diligence of working through all those options. So all I'm saying is one of those options is this uncaused cause that is personal is the one that potentially provided the morals for. That's an option. I think that's a fair one. If the uncaused cause is not God, but you at least are going to agree that this uncaused cause does exist, maybe the morals came from that entity as well. That's an option. Option 3, of course, is like I just explained a little bit, part of a atheist view, is it just evolves through time. Just somehow qualities like this just somehow evolve as well. Don't forget, if it comes from something that isn't intelligent and not personal in terms of making those choices, what is the likelihood that will be the one that comes up with these morals? And if it doesn't come up with those morals, what is then the likelihood of option 3, that they just evolve from nowhere? No true moral giver, no true source. Because morals isn't something like matter. It's not something that science really can. And this is where it gets interesting. And this is why I think the debate between Cliff and Matt really did cause some very interesting issues. Is my point being, there are things in life that you simply can't use science to prove. And that, again, is really compelling, because, again, that would therefore suggest we can't just simply look at matter and say, because science really can only work with matter. It can't really work with something that we can't really see or touch or feel or taste or whatever. It's just the limitation, if you like, of science. And of course, you could say atheist view would be, well, one day we will find a way. You can do that, but the problem is, how does that answer the question for you? You're not going to be here in billions of years of time. So even if it did have an answer, it's not going to help you, because you've gone and passed by then. You will no longer exist. I will no longer exist. All of us will no longer exist in this lifetime. We only have up to around 100-ish years to live for the best part. Anything over that will be unanswered for us. So Where do we get, of what value? So don't we really think, if we're going to try and get an answer, let's try and get an answer that we can get for now while we're still alive, to see where it takes us. Because if that answer can help us in life, then that's worth considering. So that will be the question, which will be part of what we're going to be discovering for the case of God in future weeks, is that there is an answer that we can get that can impact us directly in our lives today. And if that's an option, and I'm just going to leave it there as an option, I think we should at least consider it. I'm not saying I can prove it. Let's just be sensible here and be helpful and open to our atheist friends. Let's just see it must be an option. And that's my point I'm really trying to put forward here. It's at least a feasible option. So then we're going to look at how feasible are those cases. Just like we have the 6 suspects for this crime, we have to put them on the table. They have to all be interrogated, all have to be investigated. It's only through the investigation we can then see what's the most likely. But what we must do, which is absolutely essential, is to include every possible sensible option. We can't include every single option. Of course, we could go into the silly numbers, but why would you want to add options that are just so unlikely? Because really, people could always come up with something. If I come up with a million options, which we haven't got the time to investigate a million options, then we would already at that point see that there's got to be some sense that needs to prevail. And that is to look at the more sensible logic options that have the best evidence for the case, for their case. So in other words, when we looked at the, say, case 6 suspects, 8 suspects, then we would have to look at the ones that are the most likely to be worth interrogating. We wouldn't, for example, interview every person on the planet, because technically anybody on the planet could have been the one that committed that crime. But there are some clever methodologies that would eliminate and being sensible about who would we put down. We would eliminate it to the top most likely suspects based on the evidence we've got. So the evidence we've got is through science that there was a beginning. That beginning must have therefore had a big cause, because everything we know, as I said at the beginning, has a cause. The thing is just, what is that cause? And that cause, because it could not have had a beginning, because that itself would then have a cause, must have therefore be an uncaused cause. All we're saying is it must be intelligent, powerful, and personal. And that is what we're calling God, and that's option 1. Option 2 is it's a uncaused cause that's not powerful, intelligent, and personal. I'll stick that on the table, whatever you want to call that, bit of matter, whatever, which is kind of where the Big Bang comes from. Does still argue the fact, where does the power come from to set that Big Bang off in the first place? So again, that's going back to this same issue of where the Big Bang is becoming less and less of a case. The third case is this whole thing about evolution, but I don't think the evolution really gets to the moral suspect, because morality, again, is something that we would say has got to be based on the same logic. It's got to be moral giver, but we'll put it on the table that it's just part of some evolutionary process from this uncaused cause. Somehow, just from when things start to evolve or come into existence, this whole sophisticated, evolved process, including morality, gets developed over time. So what that's also suggesting is morality was never the same at the very beginning. That's also very interesting, because when we're going to look at some stuff here in a minute that is thousands of years old, it still comes with the same level of morality. So it's actually suggesting morality at this even top level, this what we call clear case, of what we would say is good and bad, was even known that far back, which also suggests it didn't go through a kind of evolutionary process. It was always there. We have no case that ever, when humans existed, morality didn't, or morality existed at a lower level. But we'll put it on the table anyway and say, okay, there is this case that somehow morality sort of evolved over time from this uncaused cause. And option number 4, which is really just a bag of everything else, is that there isn't an uncaused cause somehow, even despite all the science is pointing to, not what I'm pointing to, but what science is pointing to, is somehow we just don't know the answer, and we're going to leave it at that. And it could be anything that, could be Martians from another planet, another multi-universe. The list goes on. But where do you draw the line? But we'll put it there as that exceptional further bag, if you like, case. And I think all these just at least need to be on the table. And you now have to make the choice of what you think is the more likely. Now, like we said, one of the best positions we got from the theist position is, like I said, we've got no evidence that as humans that we have any kind of ability to change or develop morals. Even after all these years, no one's going to disagree at any point in time that love is not the key to all of this. And there was a very good phrase. I want to read this phrase out, and this is where when it comes down to it, what it's all about, in my view. So let me see if I can find this very, very simple point. So this is what an individual said, and a very quite well-known individual actually, and he has unfortunately some very serious medical issues. So he's in quite a bad medical state. Unfortunately, he was born with all sorts of medical issues, which is very sad to see. But he did say this incredibly powerful point. And he just says that, for me, if there's no God, then why do I love life? If we're just beings that just part of an evolutionary process, why do we have this quality of love in us? Why aren't we just people that almost like, they're just like robots? We just evolve and we look at things and whatever, it's going to be very random. It's going to be all over the place. You're going to people look at things and take things as they need it. They can need food. They just take whatever, and they're not going to think twice. They're not going to be considerate and think, well, if I'm taking it and I'm depriving this other person, so what? I need to just survive. Survival of the fittest. That would produce a very different process. Let's be honest. If there is no lawgiver, no intelligent source that is personal and is the source of this love, then aren't we just, random chemicals just floating in the air through whatever random processes? And that wouldn't point to love. That would point to chaos. And that's why this quality of love is very, very interesting morally, to suggest there's a moral giver. And that's why we're saying that moral giver must be real, because otherwise it just doesn't make sense that we have this love for life. We would just be whatever, something to reflect on for sure, I think, anyway. So what does the case for God come up with? So from a Christian point of view, the case for God, of course, this is a separate argument. We won't go into details on this stream today because it's a separate topic. But when we look back thousands of years, what have we got as evidence? Well, if we're going to say this uncaused cause is powerful, intelligent, and personal, what evidence do we have of such a, if you say, case? The theist position is on the basis of the evidence of what we do know at the very beginning. And we do know that we have evidence of human life, 6,000 plus years ago. We have evidence back, not as far as that back, certainly archaeology has proven to a very good degree, ignoring all this thing about evolution and all this speculation that we're billions of years old and all that, because there's no evidence of that at all. But on the evidence that we do know of human life, we can go back 6,000 years plus, and then in that we do see archaeological evidence of many things that did take place, and a lot of this was then written down, some 2,000 years or whatever it was. I don't know precise dates, but certainly on a separate subject. We can go into the detail of this, but basically there are evidence of these things documented. And a lot of what was documented, not just the only place I will admit, but a lot of that was documented, has been written through various means that finally were written in parchments, papyrus, paper, through the ages, that were carbon dated back to the original manuscripts that we've got of documents that were written on various different forms. Whatever it was, maybe 3,500, 4,000 years ago, where we do have evidence of these things written down about these events. And that is to a high degree written and been recorded in what we call the Bible. So in the Genesis account, and a lot of the Old Testament have a lot of historical records of events that took place that have been archaeologically proven to be true. True in the sense that we have clear evidence of their existence, in terms of the flood. There is evidence of the craters that's been caused and what have you, major wars and kings that existed that have been documented in the Bible, a lot of which have been proven to be real people. And we've had no case yet of anything being disproved. Of course, not everything has been finally proven. Of course, there's still things that we haven't discovered, but we haven't had anything that was discovered that would go directly against what the Bible is saying. That's why the Bible is an interesting document. And that's one of the very few documents we've got that record these things. And from a moral point of view, this is where it gets interesting. Even that far back, the Bible provides a moral explanation. So, as part of that case for this uncaused cause to be God, it would need to be able to put a case for the moral argument, because if this uncaused cause was personal, because it made a choice to create the universe and the way that we see us with the love that we have, you would expect there to be a moral giver. Is there any evidence for that? And this is what really is the crux of this argument. So yes, the theist position is, we see in that document, which we call the Bible, cases like it. Start with Genesis 1:27. God created man in his own image. In the image God, he created him. So that kind of does make sense. And don't forget, this is thousands of years ago this was written, that this uncaused cause, which we're calling God, made in his own image, man. Now that makes a lot of sense, because look at the qualities we have. We are definitely reflective of some very sophisticated qualities. This quality of love, these objective morals that seem to be in all of us, with no exception, I would say, is again evidence that, the Bible is saying it's because it came from the creator of all things, which we are calling God. Isaiah 33 verse 22. I'm just going to name you a few verses here for the case for God. God, our Lord, is our judge. He is our lawgiver. The Lord is our King. He will save us. So you can see, he says there, he's our lawgiver. This is stating very early on. This is very important, because don't forget, back then, the science of this was never really understood. People would have a clue where morals come from. And of course, that's really what we're talking about when we say lawgiver. The part of that law is the moral law, if you like, that we clearly have now shown as evidence that exists in us humans. James 4 verse 12 says, there is one lawgiver who is able to save and destroy. Who are you to judge another? Again, this is where the power comes in. This uncaused cause must have been powerful and has therefore the ability to save or destroy. If he created the universe, took the choice of creating the universe, he certainly has the power to do what he wants with it. So he could either save it, or he could destroy it. If he wasn't happy with it, he could just destroy it at a blink of an eye, and that would be the end of the universe. But we still are here today. So, but look at that as a statement made that many thousands of years ago. A little bit more recent, but still, at least over 2,000 years ago, in the New Testament, in Romans 2, verse 14 to 15, for when the Gentiles, which had not the law, but do the nature, the things that contained in the law, these having not the law, are the law unto themselves. Now, this again is quite a significant point here. If I just break down this verse, to do by the nature contains the law. So somehow it's basically saying that inside us, in our nature, we have this law, but it's the choice of whether we want to choose to exercise that law, like it says, or be a law to themselves. Because with free will, which we clearly, I don't know if anyone disagrees that we don't have free will, I think we all agree we have free will, we do make choices. And even though we don't fully understand how this all, to be honest, works, we would agree we do have the ability to make choices, good choices, bad choices, but we know what's good. But sometimes we can be selfish and have reasons why we don't want to choose it, but we still know at least that is the law, that is what is good. We won't dispute it. But if I can do something bad, but ultimately take advantage of it, then that's what we're saying here. And this is something that has been written that far back. Micah 6:8 says, he that has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. So this is where it gets a bit more interesting. Don't forget, this is written a long time ago. How profound is that? That whoever this uncause causes, we need to recognize what that is. We need to do what is good. It's telling us this is the framework that we should behave, that we should be good, we should be love mercy, we should be just, and we should even walk humbly with your God. Now, this thing about humble, again, as a moral, this is a little bit less clear. Certainly back in the day, being humble isn't always seen as a good thing. Many people would dispute that and say, well, no, I don't think humble. I think that's where you're just leaving yourself open to be manipulated or abused or whatever. But if you think about it, if we're not humble, what are we? We're the opposite, of course. We'll be aggressive, forthright, and of course that has so many issues. So we're not saying humble as in being naive and being stupid about things or whatever. We're being humble as in we're not elevating ourselves over above others to a point that we're trying to get some advantage, because we can see that principally that just doesn't work. And we've got evidence of that clear case that ultimately when we read some of these books, if you ever want to read a book on morality and looking at the science and philosophy over morals, then these virtues are clearly proven to be the right way, that we should all be very humble. If we're all very humble, we would be in a much better world to live in. It's that when people are very not humble, we see morals decline. And again, this has been written about these clear morals, even at this level, being already written that long and long ago. So it does leave us with this whole argument that then says, well, what is right, what is wrong? If we look at it from purely a subjective level, then if we just evolved, then who's to say what is right, what is wrong? So let's look at that as the second case. If there was no God, this uncaused cause wasn't personal and just existed, and through that evolved what we see today, then we would just have morals that would be all over the place. It would be subjective, and therefore who's to say what's right and wrong? And therefore, what would happen if that was the case? Then who is to say, how does an atheist have any argument to say what is truly morally correct? Because if we are just existing as some evolved process through evolution or some variation of that, then who's to say whether killing somebody is wrong or depriving somebody of nourishment, that if it helps feed you? If you're in a position where, I don't know, you're on holiday or whatever, and you go to maybe a country which has a lot of poverty, and you may be waiting for a bus or something, and you're sitting there, or a taxi, and you have a person not far from you just sitting there, clearly without food for a number of days, struggling and you've got food in front of you, probably plenty enough for you to have your lunch and with a bit extra, and you could easily say, okay, I don't necessarily need to eat all of this. I could have just half and give the other half to this person in need. Why would you do that? If you're just some process, you just exist, and all you're really going to care about is looking after number one, you wouldn't really need to worry about that person. It doesn't improve your evolutionary process. All that improves you is the best that you have as your welfare for yourself. It would have no reason to prove or explain why you should give food to somebody that has no connection to you, no benefit for you whatsoever. They just happen to exist as another human being. Whether they eat or not, in other words, doesn't have an impact positively on your life. But why would you say it's the right thing to do to share that food with the other person? It's not because of an evolutionary process, it's because it's something over and above it. It's this objective morality that is in all of us that still has this quality of love that says, yeah, I should help that other person. And we can't really explain it. Certainly atheists can't. And I'm not saying I can explain it either. I'm not saying as a human, why is it? We just have got that quality and we just can't deny it. So all we are saying is, does that quality come from a moral giver, which is this uncaused cause that's all powerful, all intelligent and personal? Or does it come from a uncaused cause that's not all, maybe it's got some power, but certainly isn't all intelligent and certainly isn't personal? What is the reality of that being a plausible case as a suspect to answer the moral argument? The Bible has provided this moral argument very, very on, and there's no other book that far back that provides that moral argument. There's been other books that have come later, which we could argue with. There's the Quran that comes many thousand years later, 7th century. We've got other books that are coming out from other religions and other belief systems that have produced books. So you have to look at, one is that the moral code in that book. Certainly, I would look at certain books like the Quran and have my concerns about some of the moral code, moral code in that book. But also the fact it came so late. Because if there's a moral giver, that is this uncaused cause, he's not going to leave thousands of years or many generations of people without a book or explanation to help them understand life and provide the evidence of who he is. He's going to do that. If he's going to create people that's going to understand the image of him, he is going to produce some kind of book, if you like, or wording or communication, at least if you put it that way, to prove he exists. He's going to do that very early on, and we should see the evidence. If there was a case that there was no evidence whatsoever until 3,000-4,000 years later, that would be a cause for the atheist to say, well, if there was a God, why has he waited so long to communicate with his creation? A creation that can understand, comprehend, has the intelligence to receive information, receive a communication. Why would God leave it so late? So we therefore, by default, have to say it has to be based on the earliest writings of evidence of God's communication. And in the Bible, we have a huge amount of that, not just in terms of written communication, but also God interacting into the world. There are cases of God working in many examples. Of course, they're very difficult to prove, of course, because how do you prove a supernatural event of God getting into his creation and getting involved? All you would see is possibly the results of that. So, for example, if God threw fire, it talks about that in Sodom and Gomorrah, how God rained fire down to Sodom and Gomorrah. There are other events where God gets involved. It's going to be difficult to say whether that was God. But here's the point. The morality itself is a very good indicator that this uncaused cause was personal, and that personal being that chose therefore to make the universe, because it had to choose, because it has got to be the cause of the universe, had to make a choice in order to make this sophisticated universe. It therefore makes complete logical sense. It needs to be the one that, or is the one that provides the moral codes that we're talking about. And the Bible is so far one of the best examples or arguments of those moral codes. When you read the Bible, and I've just given you a few examples, there are many others of how the Bible provides this ultimate moral code. Now we're going to look at more detail in a different week about the evidence of God and why we should be the case for Christianity, why the Christian position is the best explanation of this uncaused cause that we call God. And that will be in following weeks. And one of the things I was going to say is how that's going to be unpacked. It's going to be based on this very, very detailed critical review of the debate between Cliff and Matt on the subject of is Christianity true? Because that really where is all this is going, is if there is a moral giver, we call that God. We believe that Christianity is the representation or reflection of that true God. And the way that we do that, that's a bit like, again, a court case, is we look at the evidence, we look at the other religions, and we say, okay, what is it about Christianity that's unique? One of the things for me that stands out, just briefly, is Christianity is very true to that book, to that word, the Bible. And if the Bible is the best and clear evidence of the communication of God, and we look at what's in the Bible as the best case of explaining God, and then I would say Christianity is the best example of the people that follow it, because Christians are, of all religions out there that I'm aware of, that follow the Bible more accurately than anyone else. And if you do not follow the Bible, what else you're following? If it's a much later book, then you have to beg the question, why are you believing a much later book, and why are you believing it? And when you look at the moral code behind those books, they're in no way as sophisticated as the Bible. Now, there are some, and I know some Muslims, if they jumped on, would say, okay, I'm going to put the argument that, well, there's lots of atrocities in the Bible. But we need to look at that in context, because there aren't atrocities that are based on the moral code that God is providing. Those are things that are resulting from God's judgment, because ultimately God is, if he's a just God, of course that's part of those morals, he has to be just, cannot allow wickedness to just continue, especially if they go against God's plan. If God's got a plan to save mankind through a particular way, which in the Bible it talks about how he selected a nation, through that nation he was going to provide a solution to save humankind, then he's got to help make sure that actually happens. And of course that nation was attacked a lot, and if God just allowed free will to take place and not get involved himself, that is, then we may not even be here today. So morally has to be just as well, and we do, and we can explain those verses as well. But we don't see in terms of his moral code of how he takes care and how he saves mankind. It's all from love. God, it says in the Bible that God is love, and again, that all makes sense if that really is what morally we all end up pointing to. It's like that young man, said, if there is no God, then why do I love life? I think that's an incredibly profound point. That quality of love is showing that there is more to life than just being process of beings or molecules in the air coming from some uncaused cause that is not intelligent, not personal. It all points to a moral giver that is all powerful, all intelligent, and most important of all, personal. And why we as Christians believe it as well, on top of all that, if that isn't enough, is the fact that we do have a personal relationship with God, and that personal relationship is part of that evidence. When I pray and speak to God, shall we say, and I get answers to those prayers, that is very, very convincing to me. And I've had no case outside of praying to God to praying to anybody else or speaking to anybody else in terms of any supernatural being or spiritual being or whatever has answered those prayers. It's only God that I'm aware of, which is the God of the Bible. And that's why I believe the moral argument is that there is a God, and that God is the moral giver. Well, that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed those thoughts. There is probably another little, maybe I can, to close, just give you a little argument here. I'll do a little summary as well before we do that. So let's quickly, just if I can, just show you a very important, useful video as well. If I can't, then I won't. Let's see if I can just get this, if I can play this. I had problems before trying to get this to work. So bear with me.
Oh, wow. Shutters up have transformed my house.
Right, let's just share this with you. And I've got it to work. Hopefully this will work. This is with, I'm not sure this guy's name, but we've got Frank Turek, who's I believe a Christian. Anyway, this other guy, I think he's, I'm not sure what his position is. He may even be a Christian himself. Anyway, the more argument has been discussed between them. So let's watch this.
Us through evolution. It's essentially Sam Harris's argument when he debated William Lane Craig. Human flourishing. That's what is moral. We all know that we want it. But I mean, I have my own thoughts about this. But how would you respond to that idea? Why do we need God in order for there to be objective morality, or how does the fact that there is a more objective morality point us to God? But first, is there objective morality? All these questions are integrated into each other.
Let's start. Is there objective morality?
Sure.
I think we know that by intuition.
Okay.
In fact, Jay Budziszewski at UT Austin wrote a book 20 years ago called "What We Can't Not Know," and he basically says this: when you're old enough to know what murder is and what wrong is, you know that murder is wrong. It's not innate knowledge; you weren't born knowing it, but your mind is structured in such a way, based on the fact it's made in the image of God, that when you're old enough, if your mind is functioning properly, you know murder's wrong. Now, you could be talked out of that by bad education or by propaganda, that kind of thing. But properly functioning mind, appropriate age, you know murder's wrong. Now, why would it be wrong if there was no God? It would be just your opinion. And if there's no purpose to life, as atheists say, then you can't say here's the right way to live life and the wrong way to live life. Sometimes I give this illustration, particularly on a college campus. I'll say, how do you know that your quarterback throwing a touchdown is better than your quarterback throwing a pick six? That's when he throws it to the other team and they take it back for a touchdown. And people initially don't get it. They say, well, the rules. No, it's not just the rules. The only way you know a touchdown's better than an interception is the purpose of the game. And you know that a touchdown takes you closer to the purpose and a pick six takes you further away. If there was no purpose to the game, you couldn't make any judgment to say, this is a good play, the touchdown, and this is a bad play, the pick six. Likewise, if there is no purpose to life, you can't say that, loving somebody is the right way to live and murdering them is the wrong way to live, because there's no objective to life. Without purpose, you can't determine good or bad, right or wrong. Even from a pragmatic perspective, you can't determine that. So there's got to be a purpose, and atheists admit there's no purpose to life. And even Richard Dawkins admits this. He famously said that in a universe of blind physical forces, there is no justice, there is no good, there is no evil. Things just happen, and bad things happen. And he goes on to say, I'm obviously paraphrasing, I don't have it memorized, but he says, we just dance to our DNA. We're just molecular machines, in other words. We're just moist robots. If we're just moist robots, then murdering someone, first of all, we didn't make the free choice to do that. We were just compelled by physics or evolution to do that. Mm-hmm. Or loving them, same thing. It's just what is. It's not an ought. You can't get this ought from biology. You only get an is. This is what happens. How do we have moral obligations if there is no, first of all, is no moral standard and is no authority to say you ought to behave this way? You don't get moral obligations. You might get moral sentiments. You might get, I have this idea that love is better than murder, but you're not obligated to obey love is better than murder if there is no objective moral standard and there is no good beyond us and there is no authority beyond us. It's just your opinion. And by the way, as we know, even Richard Dawkins will admit this, Darwinism, evolution, is completely all about the survival of the fittest.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he says, I don't want to live in a Darwinian morality, because it is survival of the fittest. Should we kill the weak so the fittest can survive? That's what Hitler did. In fact, he used evolutionary theory in Mein Kampf to advance Nazism, to advance the murder of the Jews, so he could create the Uber race.
And the disabled, right? I remember reading about in the Nazi regime, they just calculatedly obliterated people with disabilities, the weak members of society as well, from a Darwinian motivation.
They obliterated the Jews, the homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, the disabled, gypsies, because they thought they were inferior stock, so to speak. This is eugenics. This is not people made in the image of God. In fact, how did they get the Nazis to murder all those Jews? They said they were subhuman, right? They dehumanized them. So yeah, there is no God. If there is no God, there's nothing ultimately right or wrong. And if you're going to say that evolution is given your moral sentiments, well, they're just your moral sentiments. Then they're not really binding. They're not obligatory. It's just an opinion that you have. And by the way, if evolution has given us all our moral sentiments, evolution has also given us all of our thoughts as well, including the thought that there is no God, including the thought that morality is just a artifact of evolution. So it's really a self-defeating view at the end of the day, Brent.
Because wouldn't the eugenics that you were talking about actually be moral if the end goal was that the fittest would survive? If that's the definition of what is moral, is the human species becoming stronger and more healthy people going forward in history, then this is something I don't understand. I've never heard like an atheist or evolutionary ethicist answer this particular question. That seems to be actually moral according to that view, if the end goal is fit survival.
Well, what they have to do is smuggle in a standard like human flourishing, which is what Sam Harris does, and we respond to him in the book Stealing from God. They have to smuggle that standard in order to make their system work. But again, if there is no God, not even human flourishing is good, because there is no good. There's no purpose. There's no objective. So human flourishing isn't good either. In fact, if you're going to say human flourishing is the standard, you could also ask which humans? The Nazis?
I tried a ton of AI work tools. Then I tried Monday.com. Game over. Monday.com.
Or people oppose the Nazis. Again, you have no standard by which to judge that. All humans? Who said? You said? What if Hitler comes along and he says, I want to create the Uber race, and I want to get rid of the homosexuals, and I want to get rid of the gypsies, and I want to get rid of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I want to get rid of the Jews, and I want to get rid of the disabled. I want to do all that. Why is that wrong if there is no God? It's just your opinion. There is no right or wrong if there's no God. And all you can say is, if evolution's true, that first of all, you wouldn't know it's true because the thought that you have that evolution's true was given to you by evolution. Secondly, it's just the way things are. It's not right or wrong, good or bad. It just is what it is. You don't get this ought from this biological process. You only get an ought from an immaterial moral authority who is righteous himself and is the standard of rightness, and said, here's the objective of life. Love one another. Don't murder one another. That's how you get morality. You don't get it from the bottom up. You get it from the top down.
So your football analogy reminds me a little bit of C.S. Lewis's idea of the measuring stick. He says you have to have an idea of straight in order to know what crooked is. It's that idea of a transcendent thing, or in your analogy, the rules of the game, not just how are we playing it. You can't change that all of the time. There has to actually be an agreed upon, embedded, baked in understanding of how does this game work? What are the rules of engagement? How does the world work? And the idea that we can understand when something is wrong itself reveals that there is something outside of just your opinion versus my opinion.
That's right. Yeah, there's always a standard you're appealing to. In fact, Lewis says in Mere Christianity, if you're going to say that one set of ideas is better than another set of ideas, for example, if you're going to say, and he wrote this during World War II, if you're going to say the Nazi ideas are better than or the Allied ideas are better than the Nazi ideas, you're implying there's a standard beyond both the Nazis and the Allies to which you're comparing both sets of ideas, right? There's got to be a standard to outside of, say, America and Germany to say, well, America's closer to the truth than Germany was in World War II. What is that standard? That standard has to be outside of both countries. That standard is God's nature. And Lewis also gave the illustration of boats where he said, we might agree that it's better if, there's certain rules of the road when we're out there in the sea. You don't cut me off in a certain way, I won't cut you off, that kind of thing. But you really got to figure out, why are the boats out there to begin with? I mean, what's the purpose of boating? Like, where are you going? What are you doing? And without that overall purpose, there's no objective way of saying this is the right way to boat and this is the wrong way to boat, right? There's got to be an overall purpose, and that overall purpose in life, according to Christianity, is to know God and to make Him known, to love God and love one another. And when you do that, you'll know God and you'll make Him known.
Okay, your robotic writing is bad for business. So let me show you how.
Okay. I think that's very, very powerful, and I think it's a great way of looking at things. This whole thing about objective morality, purpose in life. Anything between us is just one opinion against another. If there was no God, it's just your opinion versus my opinion, etc. Who's to say it's right or wrong? There has to be something that is over and above, that is that standard, that authority that we must we point to, that can make the distinction of what is right and wrong. Without that, then we've got no way of really knowing what is right and wrong. And what we're saying is that ultimate authority has to be the same uncaused cause that is all powerful, all intelligent, and personal, to make the choice to say, yes, I'm going to create the universe with this love and purpose in life, so that one can live a life that is worth living, that is enriched and purposeful and enjoyable, as long as you follow the way that I've created you. And of course, in the Bible, we have that laws, we have those principles, we have that whole moral code explained, which if you follow, you will find that it is the best way. So that again points to that moral giver being that authority, that standard being what we call God, rather than it just being some uncaused cause that's not personal and doesn't have that, therefore, principle and purpose. It's just, as you say, we're just floating DNA in the universe, but we clearly see purpose in life. We clearly see all points to this moral standard that, if we do comply to, clearly proven exists, which is why it all points to the case for God, rather than the case there is no God, because without God, then there wouldn't be purpose in life. There wouldn't be this ultimate standard that would make sense, because the standard is pointing to a purpose in life, to a benefit in life, to a value through love that we can live in a very beneficial way. So I hope that adds some more thought to the argument, and I'll be very interested to see what people think of it. Do let me know in your comments. I know I've had actually quite a few comments I haven't replied to. I do apologize. I've been unbelievably busy lately for different reasons. So I will get to your comments. If you're going to make comments, I will reply to them. We haven't had anybody wanting to jump on the stream, which is a bit of a shame. I haven't had any comments directly live at the moment. Nothing's come through. So there isn't anything to respond at this moment. But we'll see in time. There's still a lot of people that are probably not aware of my stream, and so it is part of getting myself known out there. And I'm sure for those that do watch it, hopefully it will be of value to you. And certainly for you atheists, I think it's got to be at least worth considering these things. And you're welcome to join at any stage, and you want to put your case or even ask questions on to my points that have been made. You're more than welcome. Be very interesting conversation, I'm sure, but one, of course, which will all I would say is it has to be done in respect. I won't accept any bad behavior. You need to be respectful, and I will do the same. We don't talk over each other. We don't get personal. We just express our points and do it in a kind and respectful manner. So anyway, that's pretty much it for the stream today. I hope that's really put forward a good argument, if you like, to at least explain whether or not you believe this moral argument is good evidence that there is a God. For me, I do believe it really is pretty compelling. Be interested to see what you think. And anyway, for now, until next week, which we'll probably continue in the series. As I say, we've got this really big review coming up on the big debate between Cliff and Matt, which is an atheist versus an atheist. And that's going to be a very good review. If it's not next week, it'll probably be the week after. It will take a little bit of preparation. I've done a lot of study already, and I've literally read the whole of the argument twice. And now I'm just going to go through and start putting together my preparation on addressing the salient points that came out of it. So that's something coming up. Until then, of course, God bless everyone. And until next week, take care and bye for now.